The evening was calm, the kind of quiet that made Officer Marcus Hale feel like he had the whole town to himself. Ridgewood wasn't known for chaos or crime. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and kids rode bikes, until the streetlights came on. But even in towns like this, there were moments when things didn't quite feel right. And tonight, something about the corner of Maple and 3rd Street caught Marcus's attention. As he drove past, his eyes landed on a lone figure standing under a flickering streetlight. The man wore a dark hoodie pulled low over his face, making it hard to see much beyond the shadowy outline. He wasn't doing anything particularly unusual, just pacing back and forth. But something about the way he moved set off alarm bells in Marcus's mind. There was a nervous energy to him, an uneasiness that seemed out of place on such a peaceful night. Marcus slowed down his cruiser, debating whether to stop or keep driving. On one hand, it could be nothing. Maybe the guy was just waiting for a ride or lost in thought. But years on the force had taught Marcus to trust his instincts, and they were screaming at him now. He pulled over a few feet away, leaving the engine running as he stepped out into the cool night air. His boots clicked softly against the pavement as he approached the man, hand resting casually on the grip of his holstered sidearm. Not because he expected trouble, but because caution was second nature to him. "Evening," Marcus said, his voice steady and authoritative, yet friendly enough not to startle anyone unnecessarily. "Everything okay here?" The man stopped pacing and turned toward him, though his face remained mostly hidden beneath the hood. For a moment he didn't respond, simply staring at Marcus with an unreadable expression. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the hum of the nearby lamppost. But Marcus wasn't convinced. The man's body language told a different story. His hands stayed buried deep in his pockets, and his posture was tense, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Most people would have relaxed a little upon seeing a police officer, especially in a safe neighborhood like Ridgewood. This man, however, seemed more guarded than ever. Marcus took another step closer, maintaining a safe distance, but close enough to show he meant business. "What brings you out here this late?" he asked, keeping his tone light. "You live around here?" The man hesitated again, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone, or maybe avoiding being seen. Finally, he shrugged and said, "Just waiting." Waiting for what, Marcus wondered. A bus, a friend, or something else entirely? Something about the man's vague answer only deepened the knot forming in Marcus's gut. Years of experience told him that sometimes the smallest details, the way someone held themselves, the slight tremor in their voice, could reveal more than words ever could. And right now, every instinct Marcus possessed was telling him this. Encounter was far from ordinary. He decided to dig a little deeper. Officer Marcus Hale wasn't one to rush into things. He knew better than to let his guard down, even if the situation seemed harmless at first glance. The man under the flickering streetlight hadn't given him a reason to suspect trouble, yet, but something about the way he carried himself kept Marcus on edge. There was an awkwardness in the air, like the seconds were stretching longer than they should. "Waiting for what?" Marcus asked, leaning slightly forward as though trying to get a better look at the man's face. His voice remained calm and steady, but there was a firmness behind it that demanded an answer. The man shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. "Just someone," he mumbled finally, his words trailing off. But it wasn't just the vagueness of the response that caught Marcus's attention. It was the tone. It was flat, almost rehearsed, like he'd practiced saying those two words over and over again. And then there was the way his hands stayed buried deep in his hoodie pockets, refusing to budge no matter how casual Marcus tried to make the conversation. Marcus took another step closer, narrowing the gap between them. He didn't want to intimidate the man, but he needed to see more. His face, his body language, anything that might give away what was really going on. "You sure you're okay?" Marcus pressed gently, tilting his head slightly to try and catch a glimpse of the man's features beneath the shadow of his hood. "If you need help with something, I'm here." For a moment, the man didn't respond. He stood frozen, his chest rising and falling rapidly as though he were holding his breath. Then, Slowly, he lifted his head just enough for Marcus to catch a glimpse of his face. It wasn't anger or hostility that Marcus saw. It was fear. Pure, unfiltered fear etched into every line of the man's expression. His lips trembled slightly and his wide eyes darted nervously between Marcus and the surrounding area, as if expecting someone or something to appear out of nowhere. That's when the man spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Help. Me disappear." 3 simple words, yet they hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. They weren't said with urgency or panic. They came out slow, deliberate, almost mechanical. It was the kind of statement that made your skin crawl because it sounded less like a plea for assistance and more like a script someone had forced him to memorize. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he nodded slowly, buying himself time to process what he'd just heard. "What do you mean by that?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice level despite the storm brewing inside him. He reached up to adjust his radio, positioning it closer to his mouth without drawing too much attention to the movement. If this situation turned south, he wanted backup, ready to roll. The man hesitated again, glancing over his shoulder once more. This time, Marcus noticed something, a faint tremor in the man's hands, visible even though they were still tucked away in his pockets. Was he scared? Or was he hiding something? Either way, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some random guy standing under a streetlight. Something bigger was going on here, and he needed answers. "You know what I mean?" the man replied cryptically, his voice cracking slightly. He took a small step back, creating more distance between himself and Marcus. His earlier nervousness had morphed into something else now, something harder to pin down. Was it guilt? Defiance? Or was he simply trying to buy time? Marcus decided to press further. "Why don't we start with your name?" he suggested, keeping his tone conversational but firm. "And maybe some ID while we're at it?" The man froze again, his jaw tightening as though he were weighing his options. For a split second, Marcus thought he might bolt. But instead, the man reached into his pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a worn leather wallet. As he flipped it open to reveal a driver's license, Marcus couldn't help but notice how shaky his hands had become. Whatever this guy was involved in, it clearly wasn't good. And Marcus's instincts told him that calling for backup was the smartest move he could make right now. The man handed over his wallet with trembling fingers, the plastic edges of his driver's license catching the dim light from the flickering street lamp. Officer Marcus Hale took it carefully, holding it up to get a better look. The name on the card read Daniel Cross, and the photo matched the shadowy face beneath the hoodie, though the man in the picture looked years younger, his eyes brighter, his expression more relaxed. It was hard to reconcile that image with the tense, almost haunted figure standing before Marcus now. "Daniel," Marcus said, deliberately using the name as a way to establish some kind of connection. "What's going on here? You seem uneasy." Daniel didn't respond right away. His gaze darted around again, scanning the empty streets as if expecting someone or something to emerge from the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I can't stay here," he whispered, his words rushed and disjointed. "They'll find me." "Who will find you?" Marcus asked, leaning in slightly to encourage him to keep talking. He kept his tone calm but probing, trying to coax out more information without pushing too hard. Years on the job had taught him that people under pressure often revealed more when they felt heard, rather than cornered. But Daniel wasn't ready to elaborate. Instead, he shook his head violently, as if shaking off an invisible weight. "I shouldn't have said anything," he muttered, his voice tinged with regret. "Forget it, just let me go." Marcus frowned. Something about this entire situation felt wrong, off-kilter, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Daniel's fear wasn't the kind that came from being caught doing something illegal. It was deeper, rawer, like the fear of someone who knew their life was in danger. And yet there was also something calculated about him. How he chose his words carefully. How he avoided direct answers. It was as though he were walking a tightrope, balancing between spilling secrets and staying silent. "You're not in trouble," Marcus reassured him, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "But I need you to tell me what's going on. Who are they? What do you mean by disappearing?" Daniel hesitated, his breath quickening. For a moment, Marcus thought he might shut down completely, retreating into silence like so many others had before him. But then, unexpectedly, Daniel blurted out 3 words that sent a jolt through Marcus's system. "Help me disappear." It wasn't just the phrase itself, it was how he said it. The first time it had been quiet, almost robotic. This time, however, emotion bled into his voice, raw and desperate. It was as if all the walls he'd been building around himself had cracked open for just a second, revealing the terrified man underneath. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Whatever Daniel was running from, it was serious, deadly serious. Without breaking eye contact, Marcus subtly adjusted his radio again, pressing the button to call dispatch. "Unit 47 requesting backup at Maple and 3rd, he said quietly, careful not to alert Daniel. "Suspicious person? Possible threat level unknown." He released the button and slipped the radio back onto his belt, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Daniel noticed anyway. His eyes widened and his body stiffened. "No!" he hissed, panic creeping into his voice. "You don't understand. If they know you're on to me, it's over. They'll come after me. And you." "Who's they?" Marcus repeated, his voice firm now. "Tell me who we're dealing with, Daniel. I can help you, but I need to know what I'm up against." Daniel shook his head frantically, his hands clutching at the fabric of his hoodie. "You can't help me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No one can." Marcus studied him closely, searching for any sign of deception. Was Daniel exaggerating, or was he genuinely in mortal danger? Either way, Marcus couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't a routine stop anymore. It was something far bigger, far darker. As the distant sound of approaching sirens began to fill the night air, Daniel's shoulders slumped in defeat. Whatever game he was playing, whatever secrets he was carrying, Marcus knew one thing for certain. Tonight was only the beginning. As the faint wail of sirens grew louder in the distance, Daniel's demeanor shifted dramatically. The momentary vulnerability he had shown earlier vanished, replaced by a tense, almost animalistic alertness. His head snapped toward the sound, and his body seemed to coil inward, as if preparing to flee. Officer Marcus Hale instinctively took a step closer, planting himself firmly between Daniel and the open road. "Stay calm," Marcus said, raising his hand slightly in a gesture meant to reassure but also to signal that he was ready if things escalated. "Backup is coming, but you're not in trouble yet. Just talk to me." Daniel shot him a look filled with desperation and anger. "You don't get it," he hissed, his voice rising just enough to carry over the hum of the streetlight above. "Them. I'm already dead if they find out I talked to you." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, though he kept his expression steady. Whoever they were, Daniel clearly believed they were dangerous. Dangerous enough to make him think speaking to a police officer could cost him his life. But Marcus knew better than to take Daniel's claims at face value without evidence. People sometimes exaggerated their situations when cornered, especially when they thought it might buy them sympathy or time. "I'm not asking for your life story," Marcus replied evenly. "Just tell me who they are. Give me something to work with, Daniel. You can't disappear forever, not like this." Daniel hesitated, his eyes darting wildly between Marcus and the approaching red and blue flashes now visible in the distance. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed, it again shaking his head. "You wouldn't believe me even if I told you," he muttered bitterly. The first patrol car pulled up behind Marcus's cruiser, its headlights cutting through the darkness. 2 officers stepped out, their presence immediately altering the dynamic of the situation. Daniel stiffened further, his hands clenching into fists inside his hoodie pockets. Marcus raised a hand to signal his colleagues to hold back for now, giving Daniel some space while he tried to keep control of the conversation. "Listen to me," Marcus said, lowering his voice so only Daniel could hear. If someone's threatening, we can protect you, that's what we do, but you have to trust me, even a little bit. For a split second, Marcus thought he saw a flicker of hope in Daniel's eyes, quickly extinguished by fear. It's bigger than you think, Daniel whispered hoarsely. Bigger than this town. Bigger than anything. His voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished but heavy with implication. By now, the second backup unit had arrived, surrounding the area with flashing lights and the low murmur of radios crackling with updates. One of the officers approached Marcus cautiously, glancing at Daniel with a mix of curiosity and caution. "What's the situation?" the officer asked quietly. Marcus hesitated, unsure how much to share without tipping off Daniel completely. "Possible witness or suspect," he said under his breath, keeping his tone neutral. "Could be tied to something serious. Keep an eye on him, but don't spook him further." Meanwhile, Daniel seemed to shrink into himself, his earlier defiance melting into resignation. He looked around at the growing number of officers, his shoulders sagging, as if realizing escape was no longer an option. Still, there was a spark of determination in his eyes, as if he were weighing his next move carefully. "Officer," Daniel said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. His voice was softer now, almost pleading. "Can we talk somewhere private, please, not here?" Marcus exchanged a quick glance with one of the other officers before nodding slowly. "All right," he said, gesturing toward his cruiser. "Let's go sit in my car. But remember, no sudden moves." Daniel nodded numbly, following Marcus reluctantly. As they walked, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something far more complicated and dangerous than either of them fully understood. Whatever secrets Daniel carried, tonight would be the night they came to light. As Daniel slid into the passenger seat of Marcus's cruiser, the interior light flickered on briefly, casting a pale glow over his face. For the first time, Marcus got a clear look at him. Really looked. The man was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe mid-20s, with dark circles under his eyes and a gaunt expression that suggested sleepless nights and constant worry. His hands rested uneasily on his lap, fingers twitching as though itching to move but unsure where to go. Marcus closed the door gently, then walked around to the driver's side and climbed in. He didn't start the engine. Instead, he turned slightly in his seat to face Daniel, creating a space for conversation rather than interrogation. "All right," Marcus said, his tone calm but firm. "Talk to me. Who are they? And why? Do you think your life is in danger?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze fixed on the dashboard as if searching for the right words. Finally, he let out a shaky breath. "It's complicated," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I got mixed up with some bad people, really bad people. At first, I didn't know what I was getting into. By the time I figured it out," his voice trailed off, heavy with regret. Marcus leaned forward slightly, encouraging him to continue. "What kind of people? Criminals? Gangs?" Daniel shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Worse. It's an organization. They're into everything. Drugs, weapons, smuggling. But that's not even the worst part." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "They take people, innocent people, make them disappear." The weight of Daniel's words hung in the air between them. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Human trafficking. If what Daniel was saying was true, this wasn't just about local crime, it was something far bigger, far darker. And Daniel had been involved somehow. "How deep are you in this?" Marcus asked carefully, keeping his voice steady despite the growing unease inside him. "I didn't have a choice," Daniel snapped suddenly, his composure cracking. "They found me when I was broke, desperate, offered me money to scout for them, to find targets. People who wouldn't be missed right away. Homeless folks, runaways, anyone vulnerable." His voice cracked and he buried his face in his hands, shaking his head. "I didn't want to hurt anyone, but they made sure I didn't have a way out. Threatened my family, my friends." Marcus listened intently, piecing together the fragments of Daniel's story. It was horrifying, yes, but it also explained a lot. The fear in his eyes, the cryptic warnings, the desperation to disappear. Still, Marcus couldn't afford to take everything at face value. "If you're telling the truth," he said slowly, "then help us stop them. Give us names, locations, anything we can use." Daniel looked up, his eyes wide with panic. "You don't understand. If they find out I talked to you, I'm dead. They'll kill me, and anyone else connected to me." "We can protect you," Marcus insisted, leaning closer. "There are programs for witnesses like you, safe houses, new identities, but you have to trust us." For a long moment, Daniel stared at him, weighing his options. Then slowly he reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. His hands trembled as he unfolded it and handed it to Marcus. "This is all I could gather without raising suspicion," he said quietly. "Names, places, dates. Everything they've done since I've been working with them." Marcus took the paper, scanning its contents quickly. Each line seemed to confirm the worst: coordinates of remote locations, aliases used by members of the organization, references to illegal operations spanning multiple states. This wasn't just a lead. It was a roadmap to dismantling a massive criminal network. But before Marcus could say anything more, Daniel spoke again, his voice barely audible. "Promise me one thing," he pleaded, his eyes locking onto Marcus's. "Don't let them find me. Please." Marcus nodded solemnly, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I promise," he said, meaning every word. As he glanced back down at the paper, he knew tonight would change everything. For Daniel, for Ridgewood, and possibly for countless others whose lives had been stolen by the shadows. The weight of the crumpled paper in Marcus's hand felt heavier than it should have. As he studied the scribbled names and locations, his mind raced with possibilities and dangers. This wasn't just evidence. It was a lifeline to unraveling something monstrous. But it also meant Daniel was more than just a scared man. He was a key witness, someone who could bring down an entire criminal empire, and that made him a target. Outside the cruiser, the other officers were growing restless. One of them tapped on the window lightly, signaling for Marcus to step out and update them. He nodded briefly but turned back to Daniel first. "We'll do everything we can to keep you safe," Marcus said firmly. "But I need you to stay calm while we figure out the next steps, understand?" Daniel nodded, though his face remained pale and drawn. His hands twisted nervously in his lap as if trying to find some semblance of control in a situation spiraling far beyond him. I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Not anymore." Marcus stepped out of the car, closing the door softly behind him. Immediately, the two officers approached, their expressions tense. "What's going on?" one of them asked, glancing toward Daniel sitting silently in the cruiser. "Who is this guy?" "He says he's been working with a major trafficking ring," Marcus replied quietly, keeping his voice low so Daniel couldn't overhear. "He gave us intel, names, locations, operations. It's big, bigger than Ridgewood." He handed over the crumpled paper, watching as the officers' eyes widened at what they saw. "This changes things," the second officer muttered, shaking his head. "If he's telling the truth, we're dealing with dangerous people, professional criminals. That's why we need to move carefully," Marcus said, his tone serious. "For now, let's get him to the station. We'll process him as a witness, not a suspect. No cuffs, no drama. The last thing we need is for him to clam up or panic." The officers agreed, and together they formulated a plan. 2 units would escort Daniel to the precinct while Marcus stayed behind to secure the area and ensure no one had been watching from the shadows. It was a precautionary measure, but given the stakes, it was necessary. When Marcus returned to the cruiser, Daniel looked up anxiously. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "We're taking you to the station," Marcus explained calmly. "You'll be treated as a witness, not a suspect. Once we're there, we'll go over everything you've given us in detail. From there, we'll decide how best to protect you." Relief flickered across Daniel's face, but it was short-lived. As the convoy began moving, Daniel stared out the window, his reflection pale and ghost-like against the dark glass. Every passing Streetlight seemed to cast new shadows over his features, highlighting the fear etched into every line of his face. At the station, Daniel was led to a private interview room where Marcus joined him shortly after. A fresh cup of coffee sat untouched on the table between them, steam curling lazily into the air. "All right, Daniel," Marcus said, pulling out a notebook. "Let's start from the beginning. Tell me exactly how you got involved with these people." Daniel took a deep breath, visibly steeling himself before speaking. "It started about 2 years ago," he began, his voice shaky but determined. "I lost my job, couldn't pay rent. I was desperate. That's when they found me. A guy approached me outside a bar, said he had work that paid well, cash under the table. At first it seemed harmless, run errands, scout places, but then I realized what they were really doing." As Daniel recounted his story, Marcus listened intently, jotting down notes and asking clarifying questions. Each detail painted a clearer picture of the organization's inner workings, how they recruited vulnerable individuals, manipulated them into compliance, and disposed of those who tried to leave. By the time Daniel finished, hours had passed, and both men looked exhausted, but hopeful. "Thank you for trusting us," Marcus said finally, leaning back in his chair. "This information could save lives, including yours, but remember, this isn't over yet. We'll need your help to build a case strong enough to take them down." Daniel nodded slowly, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm ready," he said softly. "Whatever it takes." Marcus believed him. For the first time since encountering Daniel under that flickering streetlight, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for justice but for redemption. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of activity for Daniel and the Ridgewood Police Department. Armed with the information Daniel had provided, investigators began piecing together the inner workings of the criminal organization. Names were cross-referenced, locations mapped out, and connections traced across state lines. It quickly became clear that this wasn't just a local operation. It was part of something much larger, a network spanning multiple cities and involving dozens of individuals. Daniel stayed in protective custody, hidden away in a safe house arranged by law enforcement. Though he was no longer under constant threat, the weight of his decision hung heavily on him. Every knock at the door made him jump. Every unfamiliar voice sent shivers down his spine. But despite his lingering fear, Daniel remained resolute. He knew there was no turning back now, and deep down he wanted to make things right. Back at the precinct, Officer Marcus Hale worked tirelessly alongside federal agents who had been brought in to assist with the investigation. The scope of the case required resources beyond what their small-town force could handle alone. Task forces were assembled, warrants prepared, and surveillance teams deployed to monitor suspected members of the organization. Each new discovery only confirmed how dangerous these criminals were and how high the stakes were for everyone involved. One afternoon, Marcus visited Daniel at the safe house to update him on the progress. "We've identified several key players," Marcus explained, sitting across from Daniel in the sparsely furnished living room. "Your intel has been invaluable. We're closing in." Daniel nodded, relief flickering across his face. "That's good," he said quietly. "But are you sure they won't find me? Even here?" "We've taken every precaution," Marcus assured him. "This location is secure, and only a handful of people know where you are. You're safer here than anywhere else." Despite Marcus's reassurances, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked just around the corner. He spent most of his time pacing the rooms or staring out the window, watching for any sign of trouble. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by nightmares of shadowy figures breaking through doors and dragging him away. Yet even in those moments of terror, Daniel clung to one thought. He was doing the right thing. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose, to help bring justice to those who had suffered because of the organization's cruelty. As the investigation progressed, authorities uncovered shocking evidence. Abandoned warehouses, filled with makeshift cells, documents detailing illegal transactions, and heartbreaking accounts from survivors of the trafficking ring, all pointed to the scale of the atrocities committed. It was enough to make even seasoned officers like Marcus pause, overwhelmed by the sheer depravity of it all. Finally, after weeks of preparation, the task force launched a coordinated raid on multiple locations simultaneously. Dozens of arrests were made, including high-ranking members of the organization. Evidence seized during the raids corroborated much of what Daniel had described, solidifying his role as a crucial witness in the upcoming trials. When Marcus returned to the safe house to share the news, Daniel looked both relieved and shaken. "They got them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They did," Marcus confirmed, offering a small smile. "Thanks to you, we've dismantled a major branch of their operation. Lives will be saved because of what you've done." Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of redemption. "I never thought I'd see the day when I could fix what I helped break," he admitted, his voice cracking. "But does this mean I can start over? Really start over?" Marcus nodded. "Witness protection isn't perfect, but it works. We'll get you a new identity, a fresh start somewhere far from here, somewhere safe." For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a future free from fear. A life where he could walk down the street without looking over his shoulder, where he could sleep soundly without waking in a cold sweat. It wouldn't erase the past, but it was a chance to rebuild. And for Daniel, that was more than he ever thought possible. As Marcus left the safe house that evening, he felt a rare sense of satisfaction. Justice wasn't always easy to achieve, but tonight it felt within reach. And for Daniel, the road ahead might finally lead to peace. Months passed, and the ripple effects of Daniel's bravery began to spread far beyond Ridgewood. The arrests, made during the coordinated raids, had sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. High-profile trials dominated headlines, exposing the dark inner workings of the trafficking ring. Survivors came forward, their voices trembling but determined as they recounted harrowing stories of captivity and survival. For many, it was the first time they felt heard and believed. Daniel, now safely relocated under a new identity, watched the news coverage from afar. His days of fear and uncertainty were behind him, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild his life. He had been given a small apartment in a bustling city where no one knew his past, a job at a local warehouse, and a chance to start over. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes the memories still crept in uninvited, but for the first time in years he felt free. Officer Marcus Hale kept tabs on Daniel through occasional check-ins arranged by the Witness Protection Program. Though their conversations were brief and formal, there was an unspoken bond between them, a shared understanding of how close Daniel had come to losing everything. Each time Marcus called, he could hear a little more confidence in Daniel's voice, a little more hope. "How are you holding up?" Marcus would ask, and Daniel would reply with a simple, "I'm okay, better than before." One evening, Marcus found himself reflecting on the case as he sat in his patrol car, parked near the same flickering streetlight where it all began. The corner of Maple and 3rd Street looked different now, quieter, almost peaceful. But Marcus couldn't help but think about the night that changed everything. The nervous man in the hoodie, the whispered plea for help, and the crumpled piece of paper that became a lifeline for so many. The case had taken its toll on Marcus too. Long hours, sleepless nights, and the emotional weight of confronting such evil had left him drained. But it had also reminded him why he became a police officer in the first place: to protect people, to give them a fighting chance against the darkness. And while Daniel's story was far from ordinary, it reinforced something Marcus had always believed. Even in the most desperate situations, there was always room for redemption. As the trial wrapped up, the judge handed down heavy sentences to the convicted members of the organization. Families of victims wept openly in the courtroom, finally seeing justice served. One survivor approached Marcus afterward, her hands trembling as she extended them toward him. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved us." Marcus shook his head, humbled. "It wasn't just me," he replied softly. We couldn't have done it without someone who was brave enough to step forward. That someone was Daniel. Though his name never appeared in the news or court documents, his courage echoed through every arrest, every conviction, every tear shed by survivors. He had carried guilt and fear for years, but in choosing to speak out, he had become more than a victim. He had become a hero. Back in his new life, Daniel started volunteering at a community center, helping others who had fallen on hard times. He didn't talk about his past, but he listened intently to those who did, offering words of encouragement when he could. Slowly, he began to heal, not just from the trauma of his involvement with the organization, but from the years of regret and self-loathing that had followed. For Marcus, the case was a reminder of the fragility of trust and the power of second chances. As he drove away from the streetlight that night, he glanced at the rearview mirror one last time. The shadows beneath the lamppost seemed less menacing now, almost harmless. Justice had been served, lives had been saved, and somewhere out there, a man who once thought he had no future was learning how to live again. In the end, the story wasn't just about crime or punishment. It was about hope, about finding light in the darkest places and proving that even the smallest act of courage could change the world.